Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month is entitled, It's Not the End, Finding Hope. Robin Williams said it this way: I used to think the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It's not the worst thing in this life. The worst thing in this life is to end up with people that make you feel all alone. It's obviously very telling of what happened, of course, later on with Robin Williams. But with that being said, I have a new guest. His name is Ryan. I'm going to butcher your last name. So is it Kopyar?
Kopyar, you got it. Very good. Yes.
I don't do very good with last names, but no, I was successful there. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight, Ryan.
Yeah, Robert, it's my honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having me, and love the message for the month. So excited to dive in.
No problem. I'd like to share with those who are in the United States. You know, if you're in crisis, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is now changed to the 988 shortened number. But wherever you are around the world, I do encourage you to find what resources are available, because resources are different for everyone. I'm going to start off with another quote. This is from Horatio Jones. He says, instead of saying I'm damaged, I'm broken, I have trust issues, I say I'm healing, I'm rediscovering myself, I'm starting over. What comes to mind when you hear this quote, Ryan?
I love it. Well, you know, whatever our mind focuses on, or whatever it is that we think and we feel, we're going to be manifesting into our life. Mm-hmm. So if we have negative statements about ourselves, it's quite likely that that's what we will call into our life. Or if it's already in our life, it's going to continue to grow. So, you know, I love it. I'm healing. I'm rediscovering myself. I'm starting over. Are all messages of hope, or all messages of positivity, and help to give our conscious and our subconscious mind this idea that we're headed in a positive direction. We're headed in a healing direction.
Yeah, and a lot of times, you know, we're so close to, I had another guest, but we're so close to the elephant. We can't see how long maybe this issue has been going on in our lives, or how damaging this stuff you may be ignoring because it's hard to process. It doesn't go, there's no shortcuts. You know, there may be the steps, and it's a process. And I know people may have heard this in nausea, but the process is unique to yourself. So I do feel, you know, it's when we look at this, when I look at this quote, I'm like, a lot of times we outsource our choices sometimes, unfortunately, to say, oh, only if I get this. But a lot of times it's, you know, it's good to meet who you are. Yes. who you are, and that will sometimes anchor you, especially when the world is telling you a million different things you should do, and some of them may be good, but maybe not yet. You know, I don't want to discourage positive things that may be out in front of you, but again, I love this quote. Ryan, you're new to the podcast. I love to give some time for you to share a little bit about yourself. We're talking about who we are, but we want to know a little bit about you. What brought you to where you are today? This is time to share what makes you do what you do. And yeah, go ahead. The floor is yours.
I appreciate that. Well, you know, my story has quite a few different twists and turns, and some kind of roller coaster ups and downs to it. So, you know, I share my message, and I'm so open and vulnerable because I think that vulnerability is the meeting ground for human connection, for deep, intimate, truly meaningful human connection. So that's my motivation behind what I do in the story that I'll kind of briefly share on the podcast today. So on December 28th, it was an evening. It was a few days after Christmas, obviously, and a few days before what was my third birthday. My mother was closing up at a local law firm where she worked, and she was 8 months pregnant with my sister Megan at the time, and my mom never came home that night. There was a burglary that had happened. In the course of that burglary, my mother was raped and killed, and as was my sister Megan. And so that was a part of my story that I didn't share with many people for a very long time, probably almost 3 decades of my life. I'm 36 now. So a large portion of my life that I never shared it. And there was a lot of different reasons behind that. I didn't want people to feel bad for me. I didn't want people to pity me. I think if I'm really being honest and I reflect back, it was because I didn't know how I wanted to feel about it. I didn't really know the meaning that I wanted to give to it. And I didn't even realize the pain that it had caused me in my life. And so fast forward to May of 2018, I kind of have what I call like the triple whammy of the rock bottom, right? So I had a wedding that never ended up happening, lost my job, and then I was in a very serious car accident, hit from behind, stopped at a red light, 40 miles an hour. Shoulder got all banged up, back got all banged up, and I was diagnosed with PTSD after the accident. And I didn't understand, Robert, why I was experiencing this PTSD. Why was I white knuckling it on the road? What was going on inside of me that was causing me to be so hypervigilant and all of these other presenting problems that mental health counselors and professionals would associate with PTSD? Well, it was through that accident and through the research on how I could heal myself from that accident that I realized if we experience a traumatic event earlier on in our life, obviously you can imagine that was a big one for me, that it can exacerbate a situation later on in life. So that's what kind of ultimately was the first steps of bringing me to not only healing and grieving the death of my mother and my unborn sister, but really getting myself back healthy, because there was a period of time in my life where I wasn't healthy. I was partying and drinking and taking drugs. And what I didn't realize is that there was a void inside of me. There was a pain inside of me. And rather than face that pain and rather than uncover the purpose in that pain, I just masked it. So I don't know if you want me to pause and we can kind of take it from there, or if you want me to keep going with my story.
Well, I just want to, it's funny enough, like I said in the beginning, I always say people say it better than I do. I remember reading Tom Sawyer. Mark Twain says it this way. He says, the worst loneliness is to not be comfortable with yourself. Just hearing portion of your story, that screams. I think a lot of us can relate to that. I do identify, obviously, grieving is a process and takes time. It's not something that's rushed. But at the same time, I think a lot of times, even myself, when I ever think of what I've been through, I don't want to tell people because I don't want them to like react in a way that I wouldn't respond well, because I haven't given myself enough time to, because people a lot of times, they have the 10-foot pole, I just remember my wife, she has a sister that's autistic and all this stuff. And I remember when I first met her, just tell me everything concerning what will concern me. I'm like, well, how about her? What about her? Why? Well, like I'm, all this stuff. So a lot of times it goes backwards. So for me, especially when it's very sensitive, I haven't worked through it. I don't feel comfortable because unfortunately, people don't communicate very well. They don't today. And sometimes if I'm not ready to hear it, or hear something that's distant, it could throw me off. But I just want to say I do appreciate you sharing what you're comfortable sharing. And for me, when I think about this, what do you think when you hear this quote? I know it speaks for me from what you're saying, but when you hear Mark Twain say these words, the worst loneliness is to not be comfortable with yourself.
Yeah, I think it's actually the perfect segue into what I was about to share next, which is, to be comfortable with yourself, you have to truly know yourself. And I didn't truly know myself. There was, a six-figure successful man working in the health and wellness industry, right, that had all this different stuff going on, and from the outside looked quite healthy. And there was that version of myself, but that was not the true version of myself. And it wasn't until some of the deep, deep, dark times where I did get to know my true self that I was like, wow, okay, there's some parts of me that I want to change because it doesn't make me feel comfortable. It's not congruent with the person I want to be. That's quite a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to grow into the person that you can be proud of. And so that's somebody you can be comfortable, right? So it's to your point about the quote, right? It's, well, who am I really, right? And once I uncover the answer to that, what changes do I want to make so that I can get comfortable and I can be proud of who I am?
I was also, it sounds random, but I was talking to my wife about the game Monopoly. I hate that game when I play it with my brother, because the thing about it no one talks about is you start the game and there's a sense of urgency, and there's people on the side kind of sharing, like, oh, let's do this deal. Well, if I knew the time frame of how long the game will be, then I'll have a different plan. So if the game is 1 hour, then I'm going to be really risky of how I'm going to approach the game. I feel a lot of times we don't really think about, are we thinking of this long term or short term? Is our plan based on a short term relief or short term goal, or is it long term? And long term takes time. Long term takes patience, reflection. I know it's kind of weird that I use Monopoly. I detest that game at times because I never know how long people expect to play it. And then if I'm in a rush, I don't want to play it. So I feel funny in a way. I'm just segueing that way. But the holiday season in and of itself there's a lot of pressure to have these moments. And I feel sometimes if we lose ourselves and not know, like you said, know who we are, we may feel this pressure. Okay, we need to be, I need to connect with so and so, and you never took the time before, and you may be, I guess, discouraged a lot of times because you're trying to reach out. It's not that it's negative; it's just that you're not taking the time to see what's around you at that moment. So I don't know what, you told, it's tragic. I'm sorry for your loss about your mother. I just want to say that in the beginning. But that's in December, so this month might be pretty hard. I know for me, working in the mental health field, anniversaries in regards to a traumatic event is something that we always kind of be reminded of, because it's just, even though you might be, oh, last year wasn't bad, around this year I lost so and so, it doesn't mean it's not going to be bad next year. So it's just something to be reminded. So how is the holidays? How have you been able to navigate the holidays for you?
Well, that's a great question, and a timely one. I would say there's two parts to how I would answer that. Number one, setting boundaries, right? Loving ourselves involves setting boundaries. And so, of course, we want to spend time with our loved ones during the holidays, but we're allowed to set boundaries to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, Uncle Jimmy, right? I'm going to be over for Christmas. I'll be there from 5 to 8, and I'm going to spend the first part of the morning with my immediate family, whatever the case may be. You're allowed to set those boundaries. That's a part of a healthy relationship. So that might be as it relates to the pressure when it comes to family members that are living. As it relates to individuals that have lost family members or lost loved ones, or even pets, which often hold a deep place in our heart, it is difficult, and it's okay to say, I'm not okay. And if you need to get the help of a mental health professional or a pastoral counselor or whatever the case may be, I would really encourage you to do so. The other part, perhaps a more positive framework, right, is we can honor those that we've lost. And so this December 28th, I'm going to do as I often do, a little time of reflection and prayer and connection, spiritual connection with my mother and my unborn sister, Megan, and just say, hey, I love you, and I hope I'm making you proud. And I know that you're on the other side smiling down, and, to connect with them.
Yeah. I really just go by the first part you mentioned, boundaries. One thing I always say when I'm working with clients, or just in general, is the people who usually have the problem with your boundaries are usually the ones you got to set boundaries from.
Yes.
And the other thing I like to say is, if you don't respect your time, no one else will. Yeah. It's kind of that tenfold. We want to be, even though we want to belong, even if we're introverted, we're not islands, and at the very least, we want to connect in whatever way we're comfortable. And setting boundaries will, I guess, for me, I have to. Some days, I do a lot in the church, and I say sometimes I'm like, I have to set boundaries, because when if you have nothing left in the cup, there's nothing else to give, And if you have to sometimes pause and reflect. And I think also my time working and all this stuff, I've realize how humbling this experience is, just working with people, connecting with people. On the second note, yeah, I do feel asking for help can be one of the hardest things, but I do encourage all those who's listening to do it. At the end of the day, I feel that connecting, if you need a professional help, is wise, especially during this time. Don't just say, "Oh, I'll just give our white knuckle it," as you would said before, because a lot of times I think the strength comes out when we can actually ask for help. I remember this one. It's when we're talking about courage, external courage, maybe in the environment, if you're in the military out and you're serving and you save someone's life, you give your life for someone. That's courageous. But when you're back home after overseas, one of the things I'm paraphrasing, but it's in the concept of our internal courage is to live well, in that way. So it's not the same context. A lot of us sometimes when we think about courage, it could just be showing up, staying here, working through what we can, and taking those little bits of learning and trying to building on our support, and like I said, asking for help. And I do feel and those who have lost someone, especially during this holiday season, COVID was not that long ago. People lost a lot of people during that time, and some of them fell on December. Is to find something for you to honor. I do think that's beautiful. I whether it's music, whatever is creative, whatever you want to do. One thing is always just telling the stories, especially if you're close to the person. Remember, if you have that kind of memory of as a friend, their stories live on with you talking about them. That kind of thing. It's kind of in that kind of sense. So, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, he has a lot of quotes people use, but I'm using this one. Our strength grows out of our weaknesses. I feel, for instance, I'm a talker. I can be, but I'm more of an introvert. I gain my strength from because I can't be out all the time. But one thing I notice is if I'm good at starting conversation, what I try to do is not just listen. So like whatever I'm not good at, like whatever I'm strong in, I don't focus on that. If someone is if I'm always someone who says no per se, well, maybe I should start saying yes, on vice versa. A lot of times we have our kind of strengths and weaknesses. So this has something that I've found to be helpful, because I know what my strengths are, but when it comes to the process of healing, and I think this is what I'm really aiming towards, is our strength grows out of it. The people I've lost, the struggles I had, I don't feel has made me weaker. And in the same sense, I'm like, how do you define weaker? For me, I'm who I am because of those things. So anything you want to add or anything you want to share? I'm sorry for
Yeah, no, I love it. That was well said. There's a few different ways that I can go with that. One is that, so externally, let's say you have an impact. I see this a lot in my work, and I'm sure you do too as a mental health professional, right? Where people that have big hearts, people that are lovers and empaths and givers, right? Mm-hmm. They can often say like, well, it's my strength, but it's also one of my biggest weaknesses, because then people take advantage of me or whatever the case may be, right? Well, it kind of depends on how we look at that strength. Are we looking at that strength in totality of awareness of how, if overutilized, it could also become a weakness for us? And I think if we can gain a sense of awareness around it, then we can kind of look at the weakness in a little bit of a different way. It's not really a weakness, right? It's just making a few little tweaks. And that allows it to really become one of my biggest strengths without kind of tipping to the other side of the scale. So that's one way to look at it. I think the other thing is that every single day we have an option to decide about our present and about our past. Is life happening to me, or is life happening for me? And when we look at life happening to us, we become a victim. When we look at life happening for us, we become a victor.
Mm-hmm.
So those weaknesses, those moments which made us feel weak,
Mm-hmm.
shift can be, why did those moments happen for me? And how can I shift them into making me a victor? Well, now they're not weaknesses anymore. Now they're strengths.
Mm-hmm. And, I think when I read Man Finding Meaning, I believe that's from Viktor Frankl, he kind of mentions this when he was in Auschwitz. And it's interesting because I read that book so long ago, so I'm very much paraphrasing, but there's this part where he's sharing that there's people giving some of their bread. They're helping people in there. And he kind of in a way said that these people did better because they thought there was another day. Mm-hmm. That was it. Like, there's something intangible that can, and that gives us hope. And all what you said in the beginning, I really like, is a lot of people limit themselves. It's like, oh, I'm an introvert. That means, personalities, yeah, we may be prone to one side or another, but there's slight adjustments to make that not be. Like, boundaries doesn't mean you can set boundaries and still be empathetic and giving to your ability. You don't want to give till you to help people despite yourself. You find empowerment by it, do it, but don't limit yourself. Like, oh, I am too giving. That's a choice. It's a choice that you have to say, hey, I want to give, but also, it's so for me at least, because I do prone to like to help people, but I also know if I get sick, if I don't take care of me, then I'm not helping anyone. And at the same time, it's finding that balance and understanding it's very human to go through these things. It's very human to kind of have these processes. And a lot of times, if you've been struggling for 5 years, it's not going to be quickly fixed. I think when we know who we are, and I think the quickness wouldn't matter because you're present of who you are, and you're like, okay, I'm making steps. And you value yourself, not because some station or title. You value yourself because you know who you are. You're not kind of guessing of what you want. So I think in Greek, there's this word. This is Meraki. My wife has untranslatable words. So there's no other word that's defined this way. But it says pouring yourself wholeheartedly into something and doing with soul, creativity, and love. I think of Martin Luther King, who said, if you're a sweeper, be the best sweeper. Be the best sweeper. Like, the whole thing is, don't look at the people. I used to say in church, don't look at the people in the pew, what they're doing. Just do you. Do what you like. Focus on you. I want to ask you, switching gears, what has helped you move past these negative moments? Obviously, you're here. It's great. You're sharing. But it wasn't always that way. Like you mentioned. So what helped you move past it in those moments, if you remember, in your life, and what did not help? I think sometimes it is helpful to see the contrast, what helped and what did not help.
Sure. The biggest question, not why is this happening to me, but why is this happening for me? How can I grow through these negative moments? Perhaps one way to look at it would be just kind of dropping this idea of positive and negative, in the sense that there's energy to be taken from it. And so now the question is, if it's positive, how can I kind of exponentially increase it, right? And if it's negative, right, how can I transmute it into something positive? So I'll tell you what, I never would, I won't say never, right? It probably, or very likely, would have taken me much longer to really dive into grieving the death of my mother if it wasn't for some negative events that happened in my life that led me to healing for those events, which then ultimately led me to the healing for my mother, which then ultimately led me into the field as a clinical mental health counselor. So yeah, that's what helped me to kind of move through, is maybe not looking at them as negative and maybe starting to look at them as, how can these, start to push me forward? What did not help? I'll tell you, the answer to that question for me is quite simple. Beating myself up, telling myself I wasn't good enough, telling myself either consciously or subconsciously, right, that this is who I am, that my past is kind of this permanent marker on who I am. I don't believe that's true.
And then I think you know, I think especially in mental health, sometimes, first when someone discovers that they're struggling, they want some sort of certainty, so they want a label. They maybe like, okay, I have this, but eventually you're still the same person you
That's right.
started out. So the thing is, the labels are just there maybe to help understand, but at the end of the day, you are you. So I do really gravitate what you're saying. And on top of that is, when it comes to the urgency, I feel a lot of times if you're not, especially more so now, I think, I'm not that old, much older, but I just remember a time when things were, we had phone, didn't have cell phones. It was a very different time, and the information wasn't so readily there. And I feel the sense of urgency sometimes we put on ourselves is unrealistic. I feel sometimes it pains me because if you don't know, for example, I said this before in other podcasts. When I started this podcast, someone said, "Oh, you should do a podcast." I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, yeah. But at the same time, I thought, you know what? Let me just try one. Consistency was the thing. People are like, oh, you need this equipment. I can afford that equipment. That equipment. I can afford that equipment. They're like, oh, only if you get that equipment. I'm like, a lot of times, I'm not gonna say all the time, but a lot of times those people maybe do a couple podcasts, and it's not because they're not able to. It's just they just have all these external needs to progress, and a lot of times it's just doing just making the choice to do it. And a lot of times, some episodes I thought were better than others in the technical side, but the idea is it was not shying my face away from it. It was uncomfortable, but sometimes when we shy away from the problem, it's uncomfortable. We don't really learn much. We learn more from our mistakes. But if I feel through time, and I feel like you could understand this too, is that our problems are just accountability is not a bad word, and it's a safe place. If you surround yourself by the idea that I'm working towards something, it's not scary. It's scary when you may not know, or you have these unrealistic expectations, but it doesn't mean they're not achievable. It's just how you're viewing it, reframing where you're at and saying, okay, I want to make this step forward, but I'm not there yet. But at the end of the day, when you gain value, like it gets easier because it's not about other people, it's about yourself, and I feel I had those hard conversations with people who's like, oh, these people, what would they think? What was all this stuff? And they think they're negative talking, like you're talking about, right? Yeah. And I said, at the end of the day, if you become homeless, are they going to sit there with you? No. If you needed bills, you needed food, will they? Probably not. So the thing is, I'm not saying it's easy. None of this easy. Obviously, it's hard. But what I'm trying to say is, we dictate our value based out externally. What I'm trying to say, it's yours to choose to kind of build on, and at the same time, give yourself a little bit of grace.
Yes.
This stuff takes time. Yeah. It's kind of like physically, it makes sense. Like I cannot be like 100-meter track runner at Olympic level just by practicing 3 times. We know that's not going to happen.
Yes, yeah.
But sometimes we think we want to skip a lot. But I think the process itself can be one of the most building and growing experiences in your life. You could actually find more value in yourself because you've been through it, not skipped over it.
Yes.
So any other comments or anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's well said. I think the promise is in the process, not in the outcome, right? So, man, enjoy the process. Celebrate your little wins along the process. You'll get to your promise. Your promise is there for you, right? God or whoever your higher power is, right? He put that promise in you. It's there for you. You just got to stay committed to the process, which isn't always easy, but is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, and a lot of the best things in life are not easy. Let's be honest. And at the same time, it's easy for me to say this, and people are like, "Well, my life, I'm not, I'm every like we said, every little step. If today is just I'm gonna get out of bed and go outside, that's a victory. For me, it's if it's like because a lot of times we set our parameters based on other people who have different contexts of ourselves, which makes no sense. But we do it because we have this urgency. I say, slow down, put those boundaries, take care of you, and then at the same time, before taking, and I think, like we were saying, it's not the end. Finding hope. There's intangible things that we don't even address. The way you see yourself is how you're going to interact with the world. If if you're upset, if you're bitter, I would say if you're in a toxic relationship or you're in some negative space, don't think you're just going to white knuckle it. It's not going to impact you. It's going to. How you're going to approach and I guess that's my little bit of final thoughts, but I want to leave it to you. Any final thoughts you would like to share with us today? And also, if people wanted to, is there anything else you want to share, or any final thoughts?
Sure. Well, just to the message of it's not the end, finding hope, right? And to your point, Robert, that hope or what it is that you're doing, I understand that there are people out there that for them, it's just getting out of bed, or it's just going on that 5-minute walk, or it's just not eating the fast food and choosing a healthier meal, right? It's just not engaging in that non-serving behavior. It's just not having an alcoholic drink for one more day. Whatever the case may be, it looks different for everybody. But to celebrate and to be proud of yourself in whatever that step is. And it is holding on to and embracing that process. Hey, I did this thing today. I'm proud of myself for doing that thing, right? Whatever that positive serving thing is. And then to create your own hope by holding on to that. And getting one or two people in your life, whether that's a professional, whether it's somebody from your your church community or whoever it may be, a friend, finding somebody that can love on you and believe in you and care about you and show you how to do a little better. Getting one or two people in your life like that, boy, that can really help you to find some hope and to find something to hold on to, because it's not the end. And there is if you can get through the other side of this pain, there's a beautiful new man or woman that's waiting for you on the other side of all of this. So it's not the end. And you don't even have to believe what Robert and I are saying right now. Just believe that we believe it, that we know it, that we see it every day, and it's possible for you.
I just want to share this again. If you're in the United States, if you're in crisis, this time of year I do not take lightly. 988 is a suicide hotline prevention lifeline. I also want to say that in the beginning I mentioned Robert Williams. If you're not around positive people, this quote can mean a lot more. A lot of times it's not just about being proximity of people itself, but being around people who are positive, people who you can actually build on. If you're in a negative space, I would say it's gonna affect you. I don't care how thick-skinned you are. It's gonna affect how you are with others, and it may not be. It may actually prevent you from meeting someone who may be more positive in your life. And also, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, I guess, in the sense of the wordage or verbiage. Be comfortable with yourself, who you are. It's meet yourself. Sometimes we don't even know who ourselves are. It's a great time. It's a lot of times people race to get I want to be, if I'm in a relationship, I'll be happier. I'm like, be happy with you first. Be happy who you are. Then the balance is more, because then it's not every decision when you are in a relationship is based on her or his happiness
Mhm.
versus yourself. Why can't it be a team? Why can't you just be in a team? You have
Yeah.
pluses and minuses, and you're just trying to make sense as a human, which we are. We have weaknesses and strengths, but like Ralph Waldo Emerson, our strengths grow out of our weaknesses. Don't look at problems and all this stuff as opportunities. People used to say, and closing, Rob, you're good at technology. And I'm like, no, I'm just patient. I'm patient with a lot of. That's all it is. A lot of times we rush. And it's not about and knowing your limits. If you know your limits, I feel for me, it's very freeing. And then you kind of know where you can go. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, Ryan. I know it was a little bit of technical issues. I said it funny before, but also I just appreciate people like you who are stepping out. It's not easy to always share, but at the same time, it's pushing it forward, I guess.
Mhm.
Whatever what you receive, pushing it forward, because it's not about getting the pat on the back. Is that maybe someone who hears this, maybe it may be helpful for them. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. Very grateful to be with you today. And Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and Happy New Year to you and to all the listeners and the viewers out there.
Thank you so much. I just want to share with all the listeners, ReviveMinistriesFL.com is our website. You can go to, you get linked to our YouTube and everything through that. Leaving this last quote, this is the end. By this time, this episode is right before the New Year's, actually. And Anne Frank, if you remember back, she says this: I don't think of all the misery, but all of the beauty that remains.